It was official. The son of the notorious drug kingpin El Chapo had been abducted along with several others. August 15, 2016, 1 a.m. The scene: Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. A pair of SUVs roll to a stop in front of one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Out climb 7 men, armed to the teeth. They stride directly through the main entrance of La Leche. La Leche, an elegant, stark white establishment right on Puerto Vallarta's principal thoroughfare. And inside, a birthday celebration was hitting its peak. Flowing champagne, expensive timepieces on every wrist. This was a crowd accustomed to getting whatever they wanted. The intruders didn't open fire. No shouting, no commands. They operated with a chilling composure, the kind of quiet confidence that says you know your targets are completely trapped. The entire operation was finished in under 120 seconds. The targets were the sons of El Chapo, Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzmán. 2 of the Sinaloa Cartel's top figures were escorted from the building, forced into the waiting vehicles, and spirited away into the darkness of the Mexican night. There was no follow-up call for ransom, no list of demands, no ensuing panic. They had simply vanished. But the initial mission was far more brutal. Force confessions on video, then assassinate both heirs to the world's most infamous narco-trafficker, right in the heart of a popular resort town. This is the true story of what happened. It's a story of an internal conspiracy, a shocking betrayal, and the high-stakes maneuver that prevented an all-out war between 2 of the planet's most lethal criminal organizations. And it reveals how a man, locked away without a phone, without any weapons, and with no soldiers at his command, managed to come out on top. Let's break it down. To grasp the significance of August 15, 2016, we first need to rewind 8 months to January 8th of that same year. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán Loera, the architect of the Sinaloa Cartel, an enterprise worth billions with operations on 6 continents, had already broken out of 2 of Mexico's most secure prisons, and who, after years as a fugitive, even giving an interview to Sean Penn for Rolling Stone, was finally captured once more. He was apprehended in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, in the pre-dawn hours following a deadly gun battle with the Mexican Marines. His journey took him first to Altiplano prison, then to another facility in Ciudad Juarez, where he was held under the most stringent security measures ever implemented for an inmate in Mexico. The world's most formidable drug cartel had been decapitated, and this time it was for good. And the moment El Chapo was locked away for that 3rd and last time, everyone with ties to the Sinaloa organization began wondering the very same thing. Who takes the throne now? Pay attention, because the answer to that question is the key to understanding the abduction in Puerto Vallarta. El Chapo had 4 sons: Ivan Archivaldo, Jesus Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquín Jr. But he also had a trusted lieutenant, an operative he'd relied on since the early 2000s, a man by the name of Damaso Lopez Núñez, known by the alias El Licenciado, or the lawyer. The depth of El Chapo's trust in him was so profound that during a 2014 arrest, an earlier capture, before his ultimate downfall, investigators questioned him about who would take his place. El Chapo is said to have replied, "It would have to be my friend Damaso." Damaso was intelligent, well-educated, and had once been the deputy security director at Puente Grande prison, the very same facility El Chapo famously escaped from back in 2001. In fact, he was the one who had engineered that breakout. It was an act that cemented his loyalty and earned him a spot within the cartel's most trusted circle. By the year 2016, he commanded his own private army, controlled territory across southern Sinaloa and Baja California Sur, and harbored his own grand designs. After El Chapo's recapture in January 2016, the arrangement was supposed to keep the family business intact. El Chapo's sons were to manage one flank, El Licenciado the other, all working as a unified command to steer the empire while the king was in a cage. That was the theory, anyway. But the reality on the ground was about to explode. El Licenciado had zero interest in being an equal partner. He wanted the throne for himself. And as for Los Chapitos, Ivan and Alfredo, The two eldest sons, who had spent years learning the family trade. They had no intention of answering to anyone, least of all the one man their own father had placed his trust in. What you had was a tinderbox inside the Sinaloa Cartel, just waiting for a spark. And just over the horizon, another player was observing the developing chaos, waiting for this exact moment to strike. His birth name was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. The world called him El Mencho. And it's critical to understand who this figure was, because in 2016, most of the world outside of Mexico had never even heard his name. And that was precisely the way he wanted it. He was born in 1966 in Aguililla, Michoacán, a town deep within the Tierra Caliente, one of western Mexico's most destitute and violent regions, where he grew up picking avocados and quit school as a boy. In the 1980s, he slipped illegally into the United States, drifting around California, surviving the way the poor and the cornered often do, by hustling drugs on a small scale, just another face on the street. He was arrested, and then arrested again, until a 1994 conviction in California for conspiring to distribute heroin finally stuck. That got him 3 years inside a United States federal prison, after which he was deported straight back to Mexico. In a different timeline, the story would end right there. But when El Mencho returned to Mexico, he made a very unusual career move. He joined the local Jalisco State Police. He studied how government agencies functioned from the inside, figured out which officials were on the take, and memorized how law enforcement thought and operated. Then he resigned from the police force and plunged back into the criminal world. But this time, he was armed with a completely different arsenal of knowledge. He began rising through the ranks of the Sinaloa Cartel, starting as a lead enforcer before being promoted to a senior command role. When the Sinaloa Cartel shattered in 2010 after its leader was captured and the entire power structure collapsed, El Mencho didn't flee with the others. He gathered the loyalists who remained and forged something new from the wreckage. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, and from its very inception he structured it in a way no one had ever structured a cartel before. Most narco bosses craved the spotlight. They flaunted their wealth, their truck convoys, their online videos. El Mencho moved in the exact opposite direction. There are perhaps only 5 known photographs of the man in the entire world. He granted no interviews. He made no public appearances. He was said to live a Spartan lifestyle, exercising, eating healthy, and constantly rotating between a series of safe houses across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit. The man operated like a phantom. But his cartel was anything but silent. Between 2010 and 2016, CJNG morphed from a regional crew in Jalisco into a behemoth with a presence in 28 of Mexico's 32 states. They waged war on the Zetas. They took on the Knights Templar. In 2015, they brought down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade, an audacious act of direct warfare against the state. They released propaganda films online that had the production quality of military recruitment ads. They assembled what the DEA would come to describe as the most rapidly expanding and most dangerously militarized criminal organization in the modern history of Mexico. By 2016, a DEA agent tracking Eleno's ascent put it bluntly to Rolling Stone. The second Chapo is captured, those guys are taking over. That prediction was spot on, and Eleno was well aware of it. The only question remaining was how to declare his new reign. By the summer of 2016, the pieces were in place. El Chapo found himself confined to a maximum security prison in Ciudad Juarez. In his absence, his sons took the helm of Sinaloa's operations, indulging in wild parties while ensuring the product kept moving and the business ran. At the same time, Eli Cenciato was observing from the shadows, his impatience with their weakness growing daily. So Alenciato initiated a move so secret that, at the time, no one outside the cartel underworld had a clue. He didn't approach a government contact or a neutral rival cartel. Instead, he created a digital war room, an actual WhatsApp group, uniting figures from multiple organizations who shared a common frustration. They were all fed up with Los Chapitos. This inside story comes directly from Elman Lick, otherwise known as Damaso Lopez Serrano, El Licenciato's son, who eventually turned informant and laid out the entire plot to Vice News from witness protection in Los Angeles. The members of that chat included individuals from the Gulf Cartel, along with key contacts in Mexico City, operators out of Guerrero, and even influential players from Canada. A coalition of diverse criminal factions, all communicating on a single encrypted platform, fixated on a singular goal: taking El Chapo's sons off the board for good. El Mini-Leak confessed it himself. "I was the one who actually made the decision to bring them all together." And a crucial partner in this secret alliance was none other than CJNG, Elno's own people. This is the detail that shatters everything you thought you knew about the events of that night in Puerto Vallarta. This was no rogue operation by CJNG. It was a deeply coordinated conspiracy. The Jalisco Cartel was working in lockstep with a splinter faction from inside the Sinaloa Cartel itself. Their objective was to eliminate El Chapo's sons by attacking from the inside and outside, at the exact same time. No question about it. Los Chapitos were betrayed by their own. Now, let's journey back to Puerto Vallarta. For about a week, prior to August 15th, a contingent associated with the Guzmán family had been on vacation there. Puerto Vallarta was considered CJNG turf. Jalisco was Eleño's home ground. Historically, however, the resort was a kind of sanctuary, a neutral zone where rivals could spend money and unwind. The violence was meant to stay far from the beaches. It was a gentleman's agreement. Los Chapitos were either ignorant that the terms had changed, or so arrogant they believed the rules simply didn't apply to them. The first part of the Guzmán motorcade appeared at Leslie's restaurant at 9:03 p.m. The second arrived at 9:17 p.m., with a third at 9:28 p.m. They were there for Iván Archivaldo's birthday. He was celebrating turning 33. The line of cars that approached the valet consisted entirely of white luxury vehicles. A Cadillac Escalade was in the mix, plus a Dodge Challenger with a police package, an armored Land Rover, a Honda CR-V, and a Jeep Limited. They paraded through the hotel district on Puerto Vallarta's main strip like they were the kings of the city. Inside Lec, the ambiance was just what you'd expect, as the restaurant is renowned for its all-white, minimalist interior. Everything was sleek and pristine white from floor to ceiling, as drinks poured and people made toasts. It was the kind of night that makes you feel utterly detached from the real world. At the table were Iván Archivaldo Guzmán Salazar and Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar, accompanied by their older half-brother, Cesar, an architect from Guadalajara who had intentionally steered clear of the family's illicit dealings, along with several female companions from their group. But who was missing from the party? Ovidio Guzmán, who, despite traveling to Puerto Vallarta, had opted to remain behind at the hotel. Also absent was Joaquín Guzmán López, El Chapo's fourth son, a figure known in the underworld as the Ghost of Culiacán for his uncanny ability to vanish, had skipped the trip entirely. Chance is a strange and powerful force. What no one at that celebration could have possibly known, not the brothers, not their 16 bodyguards, not their dates, nor any other guest at La Leche, was that for the duration of their time in Puerto Vallarta, they were being meticulously observed. Every step they took was being chronicled. Every vehicle they used was being identified, and a detailed log was kept of when they departed the hotel, which restaurants they visited, and the specific routes they traveled. The CJNG had maintained a full-scale surveillance mission on the Guzmán crew for the entire week they were in the city. So, by the time they settled in at La Leche on the night of August 14th, bleeding into the 15th, the CJNG command possessed perfect intelligence on their exact whereabouts and even their seating arrangement. The woman tending bar that evening, named April, later conveyed to both investigators and journalists that the entire staff felt something was deeply wrong before the assailants even arrived. She found it impossible to articulate. It was an unspoken tension in the atmosphere, a palpable shift in the energy, the kind of premonition you feel in your gut before your mind can catch up. At exactly 1 a.m., two dark SUVs rolled to a stop outside La Leche on the main thoroughfare. 7 CJNG operatives disembarked. This is how those 7 minutes unfolded, reconstructed from witness statements, security footage, and the official investigation that ensued. 1 a.m. Two SUVs halt outside the restaurant. The operatives are composed and deliberate. Their weapons are drawn but held with professional calm. This was never a robbery. It was a surgical abduction. 1:01 a.m. The armed team breaches the restaurant's front entrance. There are no warning shots, no panicked screams. Onlookers reported it all happened with such velocity that most people inside failed to grasp the situation until it was already concluded. The CJNG unit proceeded directly to the designated table. They moved with absolute certainty, indicating they had either a floor plan, an inside source, or both. 1:02 a.m. The men at the table are methodically separated from the women. The action is cold and precise. The women are neither harmed nor taken. This is a focused capture, not an indiscriminate massacre. 1:03 a.m. A visibly rattled Ivan Archivaldo is hauled out of his seat. Jesus Alfredo is grabbed immediately after him. Cesar, the architect brother who wanted no part in this world, is taken all the same. It was the wrong place, on the wrong night, with the wrong family name. Other male associates from the table are also seized, bringing the total number of men abducted to 6. 1:04 a.m. The gunmen and their 6 captives depart La Leche through the main entrance. The brothers are shoved into the idling SUVs. 5 luxury vehicles from the Guzmán convoy are left behind in the valet area, abandoned with doors agape. Authorities would later determine that one of the cars bore Jalisco license plates tied to a false registration. The kidnappers' SUVs pull away onto the boulevard and melt into the darkness. 1:07 a.m. When speaking to the media the next day, La Leche's owner described the incident in 3 simple words: violent but clean. The entire incursion, from breach to extraction, was over in less than 2 minutes. 16 bodyguards, supposedly some of the most feared men in Mexico, and not a single bullet was fired in resistance. Intelligence suggests the CJNG force that descended on La Leche that night was a 50-man unit, a massive show of force compared to the 7 men who went inside. The bulk of the crew remained outside. They had established a perimeter around the restaurant and along the adjacent streets, a tactical net ready to close if the operation went sideways. The Guzmán security detail assessed the overwhelming odds and instantly knew a firefight was a losing proposition. Engaging over 50 CJNG gunmen on a crowded tourist thoroughfare, with their own bosses directly in the crossfire, would have been a suicidal move. Consequently, they stood down, allowing El Chapo's sons to be swallowed up into enemy territory. When the sun rose, Puerto Vallarta felt like an entirely different place. Jalisco's state prosecutor, Eduardo Almaguer, addressed the media on August 15th, confirming that between 10 and 12 individuals had been abducted. The initial count was hazy due to the sheer pandemonium at the location. He verified that 5 vehicles were left behind near the restaurant, including one that had phony registration plates. He also stated that everyone involved, both the abductors and their captives, were believed to be members of competing criminal syndicates. The prosecutor alluded to the dominant criminal power in Jalisco, clearly indicating CJNG was the primary suspect without explicitly naming them. When a journalist pushed him for confirmation, he gave it. An unprecedented, simultaneous deployment was ordered, activating the Mexican Army, Marines, federal and state police, and the nation's chief prosecutor's office. This massive manhunt extended across Jalisco and into the surrounding states. The tourism board scrambled to issue a statement, framing the event as a contained, isolated incident. Jalisco's governor took to Twitter, attempting to calm the nerves of locals and visitors alike. It was all futile. The news had already gone viral. By August 16th, authorities had pieced together the identities of the captured men using surveillance tapes, forensic fingerprinting, and personal documents discovered inside the abandoned cars. The identification process was initially hampered by the fact that several of the men were carrying forged papers. Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar was one of them. At 29 years old, El Chapo's youngest son from his first marriage was officially among the kidnapped. Ivan Archivaldo's abduction was also confirmed. The remaining captives were named as Juan Daniel Calva Tapia, Josias Nahuali Rabago Borboya, and Victor Galvan Urena. Every single one of them had connections to the Sinaloa Cartel. There was no call for ransom. The kidnappers made no attempt to communicate. For investigators, that silence spoke volumes. This abduction wasn't driven by greed. At the same time, locked deep within a maximum security prison in Ciudad Juarez, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was receiving the most horrific news a father could imagine. His sons had been taken, and from behind bars, he was utterly powerless to help them. Or so it appeared. But what unfolded next, away from the public eye, is the part of the story very few people have ever heard. The DEA's intelligence on the original plot is bone-chilling. An investigative source revealed to Rolling Stone that the initial goal was execution. The CJNG's strategy was to capture the brothers, force them to give up intelligence or make coerced confessions on video, and then eliminate them. El Chapo's sons were meant to be buried on El Mencho's home ground. It was designed as a brutal message to all of Mexico's cartels, showcasing CJNG's ruthlessness and signaling that the Sinaloa Cartel was vulnerable now that its leader was caged. But then, the plan shifted. First, from the confines of a supermax prison with seemingly no connection to the outside, El Chapo himself began pulling strings. After all, this was a man who had successfully managed a global narcotics empire from a jail cell on 2 separate occasions before. Even from behind bars, under the tightest security, his influence bled through the walls. Messages were still getting out. Accounts from El Mencho's inner circle claimed that, from his cell, El Chapo began pulling strings, applying pressure from every angle to secure his son's freedom. Then came the second maneuver, a move of cold-blooded strategy. El Chapo had found his leverage. His own bodyguard, Ivan Gastelum, the man known as El Cholo, was incarcerated in the exact same facility as El Mencho's son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, nicknamed El Menchito. El Menchito had been held in a Mexican prison since 2015. El Chapo, investigators reported, used the implicit threat that harm could come to El Menchito as his primary bargaining chip in the tense standoff. The ultimatum delivered to El Mencho was brutally simple. "You will return my sons to me, just as you would want yours returned." A father was leveraging the life of another man's imprisoned son as a playing card to win the freedom of his own kidnapped children. This was the brutal calculus of the situation. Then, a third power entered the fray. El Mayo stepped in. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the Sinaloa Cartel's co-founder and El Chapo's longtime shadowy partner. This quiet, methodical leader, who had always operated in the background while Chapo commanded the spotlight, emerged to mediate the crisis. El Mayo's influence stretched into every corner of the underworld. He initiated contact with the CJNG. He positioned himself at the center of a negotiation where failure would have ignited the most devastating cartel war Mexico had seen in a decade. The tense discussions went on for about a week. On Saturday, August 22nd, 7 days after the abduction, Jesus Alfredo and Ivan Archivaldo Guzmán were released, completely unharmed, back on their home turf in Sinaloa. A top-level source inside the Mexican government confirmed their release. A source with close ties to the family corroborated the story. And journalist Anabel Hernandez, with her embedded sources within the Guzmán clan, verified it. The price for their freedom, according to a DEA source cited in Rolling Stone, was $2 million and a large shipment of narcotics paid to the CJNG. But that same source made one thing crystal clear. El Mencho had no need for the money. The payment was pure theater, a symbolic ransom, all for show. So what did El Mencho truly gain from this high-stakes gambit? He got something worth far more than cash. He broadcast a message that every major player in Mexico's criminal underworld received. Your father is caged, your security detail folded. You are not beyond my reach. The Rolling Stone DEA source put it bluntly. El Mencho was making a statement. Your old man is gone now. Don't ever think you're untouchable. From Cancun all the way to California, the criminal world heard that warning loud and clear. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The kidnapping created a fracture deep inside the Sinaloa Cartel that would never truly heal. And that fault line ran straight through the man who had helped build the very organization he now sought to control. After Los Chapitos were freed, El Chapo sent a letter from his prison cell to Damaso Lopez, the man he considered a dear friend, his most trusted lieutenant. That letter reportedly detailed a new arrangement for sharing power. El Licenciado would retain his position, but on equal footing with Chapo's sons. "I ask that you walk together on everything." El Chapo supposedly wrote, "You and my 4 sons." But El Licenciado didn't want to be an equal. He wanted the entire kingdom. Secretly, he continued to foster his alliance with the rival CJNG. He launched a campaign of disinformation, contracting tech experts for a digital disinformation campaign designed to brand Los Chapitos as government snitches, saturating Mexican narco blogs with fabricated tales about the brothers, aiming to poison the criminal world against them. He was attempting to trigger a government crackdown on them, which would clear a path for his own takeover. Then, Los Chapitos claim, a message arrived in February of 2017 that Damaso was calling for a sit-down. He wanted to clear his name in the kidnapping and settle the score honorably. When the brothers got to the meeting spot, El Licenciado was nowhere to be found, but his gunmen were. Based on a letter Ivan and Alfredo later sent to the media, the meeting was an elaborate trap designed to kill them and El Mayo in a single strike. It backfired. Wounded, the brothers managed to flee into the mountains on foot. El Mayo was reportedly also injured in the assault, and for El Licenciado, this was the fatal mistake. The cartel turned on him with a vengeance. On May 2, 2017, a mere 3 months after his failed ambush, federal forces in Mexico City stormed an apartment and captured Damaso Lopez Núñez. He was located by a hacker he himself had employed, who had been secretly recording him with a phone spy app before handing the footage to the government. He was handed over for extradition to the United States, where he pleaded guilty to trafficking narcotics and became a central witness testifying against El Chapo in the 2019 Brooklyn trial. His son, El Minilik, gave himself up to American authorities at the border in July 2017, just 6 months after the disastrous ambush. He literally walked up to the Calexico port of entry and surrendered. The Department of Justice dubbed it an unprecedented move, the voluntary capitulation of a top-tier Mexican cartel figure. He cooperated completely, which landed him in witness protection outside of Los Angeles, from where he would eventually give. The Vice News interview that offers one of the most granular insider accounts of what truly unfolded that week in August of 2016. Let's zoom out to see how this kidnapping redrew the entire map of power in Mexico. Before August 15, 2016, the prevailing wisdom went something like this. Sinaloa was the top predator. CJNG was the rapidly ascending challenger. A confrontation was inevitable, but Sinaloa's established network and vast territorial control were expected to keep it in the #1 position. After August 15, 2016, that entire equation was obsolete. CJNG had strolled into Sinaloa's personal playground, snatched the heirs, held them for a week, and then freed them entirely on their own schedule. The signal sent wasn't just symbolic. It was a statement of operational superiority. If CJNG could reach El Chapo's sons in the middle of a party with 16 bodyguards, who was safe? DEA data shows exactly what followed. Between 2016 and 2019, CJNG was linked to 3 of every 4 homicides resulting from cartel warfare in Mexico. Their geographic influence exploded across the country. From 2015 to 2019, Mexico's national murder rate surged from 15.1 to 28.2 deaths per 100,000 people. And the CJNG's nationwide expansion perfectly mirrors that violent escalation. By the early 2020s, CJNG and Sinaloa were peers. The 2 dominant organizations were now splitting roughly 30 to 35% of Mexico's territory right down the middle. The era after El Chapo had truly begun, and El Mayo was standing at its epicenter. For Los Chapitos, the kidnapping was the event that cemented their own power. Once they had utterly crushed El Licenciado's faction in 2017, Ivan and Alfredo became the unquestioned heads of Sinaloa, ruling alongside El Mayo. They began constructing a system of advanced fentanyl laboratories in Culiacan. They broadened their reach across the seas and through the skies, and evolved into the precise kind of criminal enterprise that federal authorities would later dedicate years to taking apart, piece by piece. The law caught up with Ovidio Guzmán in 2023. Guzmán Lopez was apprehended in 2024 in a situation that strongly suggested a setup. Rumors claimed he was delivered into custody by associates from his own organization. The pattern is unmistakable. El Chapo himself was extradited to the United States in January of 2017, and a Brooklyn court found him guilty by February 2019. He is now serving a sentence of life plus 30 years at ADX Florence, the infamous federal supermax prison in Colorado, the very same facility that confines El Chapo's former adversary, Elvis Sentio. Two of the most dominant kingpins in history, serving life sentences in the same prison complex in the Rocky Mountains. And Eleno? For nearly a full decade, he was the most hunted man in all of Mexico. The DEA had put a $15 million price on his head, a bounty that remains one of the largest ever offered for a single person. He managed to evade the authorities for years by adopting a lifestyle that was the complete opposite of what the world expected from a narco. No extravagant mansions, no large entourage. He moved through the mountains of Jalisco with a tight-knit, fiercely loyal crew. He was reportedly suffering from a kidney disease so debilitating that a private medical clinic had to be secretly constructed in rural Jalisco just to keep him alive. On February 22, 2026, less than a fortnight before this recording, the Mexican army eliminated El Mencho during an operation in Talpa, Jalisco. His son, El Menito, has been in United States federal custody since 2019. His wife was apprehended and subsequently freed. His daughter is a person of interest to investigators. The criminal empire he constructed, however, is still intact. The DEA reports that CJNG now functions like a franchise network, encompassing approximately 90 different cells. But the architect at the very top is now gone. He died in the same state he spent a lifetime trying to rule. So what does the incident on August 15, 2016, truly reveal? When you step back and see the full picture, it was so much more than a kidnapping. That was the day the old power structure of Mexican organized crime crumbled. The myth of Sinaloa's invincibility, the idea that the Guzmán name was an impenetrable shield, the belief that El Chapo's sons could walk through any Mexican city with total impunity. That entire illusion was marched out the front of La Leche at 10:04 in the morning and never seen again. Eleno used that moment as his global announcement. This is the power of CJNG. This is the extent of my reach, and the most incredible part is that even with a man that powerful and feared at the helm, the entire operation depended on an act of betrayal. Without Damaso Lopez leaking critical information, without him orchestrating the WhatsApp group and providing CJNG with the inside knowledge it desperately needed, that night would have ended very differently. The lesson every cartel in Mexico learned from Puerto Vallarta is the one they're forced to relearn endlessly. The enemy you should truly be afraid of is almost never the one on the outside. It's the one who sits across from you at your own table, the one raising a glass on your birthday, smiling to your face even as they plot with your rivals behind your back. Los Chapitos were sold out by the man their father treated like a brother, and instead of destroying them, it only made them more ruthless. This gave them the justification they needed to purge their ranks, creating a leaner, more vicious, and far deadlier organization than their father ever envisioned. And then there was Elman too, the quiet avocado picker from Aguilia, a man who took a drug conviction out of California and spun it into a criminal empire, seizing every objective he ever set for himself. He had finally claimed the throne, a victory that lasted only until the Mexican army ran him to ground in the mountains of Jalisco on a Sunday morning in February 2026. It's impossible to understand the narrative of modern Mexico, the drug trade, or the ongoing cartel conflicts without starting on August 15, 2016. The entire landscape shifted in a matter of hours. The story surrounding the kidnapping of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán's son is more than just another headline in the world of organized crime. It is a chilling reminder of how violence becomes a cycle that eventually turns inward. Power built on fear does not create safety. It only delays the moment when that same fear comes knocking at your own door. At its core, this story teaches us that no level of wealth, influence, or notoriety can shield a person from the consequences of a life rooted in crime. The same networks that create dominance also breed enemies, betrayal, and constant instability. Innocent moments, like a quiet night out, can instantly become scenes of chaos when surrounded by such a world. For viewers, the deeper message is clear. The illusion of power in criminal life is just that, an illusion. True security doesn't come from control or intimidation, but from integrity, lawful choices, and the relationships we build outside of fear. This case is not just about what happened in a single night. It's about the long shadow cast by every decision that leads someone into violence. And in the end, it reminds us that the cost of that path is never paid by one person alone. It spreads, destroys, and eventually comes full circle. If you want the full investigation into what Los Chapitos built from these ashes, how they evolved from kidnap victims at a birthday party to fentanyl lords with networks spanning 6 continents, let us know by dropping a comment. And subscribe so you won't miss it when that story drops. Let me know in the comments who you believe was the ultimate victor after all the chaos of that night. Thanks for watching.